Good morning, friends and neighbors. I'm happy to have this opportunity to witness to you and tell you about my growing relationship with the Lord. And I'd also like to tell you about my evolution from being a skeptic to becoming a believer. So this is not so much a sermon as it is a testimony to explain why I now believe that Jesus is actually the Son of God and our salvation for eternity. Growing up in a small town in Washington State, I didn't have much of an opportunity to go to church until I was in my early teens. But early on, I had an interest in science and how things worked, and I wanted to know how the earth was formed, why life existed, and how I became a part of the world. As a teenager, I was also confused by the good and bad things going on around about me. I had a lot of unanswered questions. Looking back, I was fortunate that my mother and grandmother both had strong faith. I asked them a lot of questions, but the answers they gave me were spiritual, and I don't think I was ready for that. I wanted a scientific answer. However, being on a farm and watching things grow, I had a lot of questions. And, for example, helping my dad plant one day, I was curious about how does this little tiny kernel of corn know how to grow up and be a plant taller than me in just a few months. And I wonder how many kernels of corn this one little one can grow. So in thinking about this last week, I was preparing to talk to you today. I said, hey, we've got Google now, so I can look it up. So I found out, and I was surprised, and maybe, are you ready for this? The average stalk of corn has 2 to 3 ears, and each ear has about 600 to 800 kernels. So this one kernel of corn became over 1,500 kernels of corn. This may be amazing, but another example to me of God's amazing power and creation is a giant sequoia tree, the tallest tree in the world. And yet it comes from a seed so small that 6 of them will fit on a dime. But perhaps the most awesome seed of all, to me, is the one that you and I came from. This tiny seed within our mother that was so small you would need a microscope to see it. I mention these things because I feel we take for granted all these marvelous and interesting, unexplained things that go on around us every day. Yeah, the scientists can tell us what happens, but they can't always tell us how it happened or how it came to be that way. You may know my good friend Dr. Irv Herman, a resident here at Paradise Valley. He told me recently about another miracle. As a doctor and OBGYN, I think that's right, Irv, he's delivered over 5,000 babies, so he must know what he's talking about. Anyway, he told me that when we were first formed, the 2 cells that we began with divided, became 4, then 8, then 16, and so on. By the time they became 64 cells, scientists can have proven that each cell knows what it's going to become. One cell is going to become a leg, one's going to become a heart, one's going to become a lung, and one a brain. Did this just happen? Is this just nature? Well, anyway, consider the wonders around us. I asked you to think about that. I have always been amazed at the beauty and wonder of God's creation. Towering mountains, sunsets over oceans, beautiful rainbows. And I've also learned about the 4 billion years it took to form our earth. And I like to think that God had a plan throughout this whole creation, that he would prepare it to have life and support life. Have you ever gazed up in the sky at night and thought about the light that you're seeing from that star left on its journey to your eye 1 million years ago or longer? Have you thought about the fact that our universe is 13 billion light years, an unimaginable number? It's hard for us to imagine how vast the universe is. I've discovered this, that some folks, when you talk about them to the size of the universe, they don't think any person, anyone, any entity could be that powerful to create not only the Earth, but the universe. My answer to them often is that who do you think formed the universe if God did not? And they'll say, well, it's just nature, or it was a big bang. So you have to ask, what was there before to form the nature? Who was there before the Big Bang? I think for a lot of folks, their God is way too small. So, you can talk to them and they say, if you want to explain it further, they just wave their hand and say, I don't want to hear any more about it. Have you met anyone like that? I wanted to mention these things as examples of God's handiwork, the abundance, beauty, and variety of life on our home planet. Such an amazing and wonderful creation. It's a mystery to me that I can only explain as coming from a wonderful, powerful, intelligent, loving being. I'll not take time to go on to the details of other things that are amazing to me, such as how do we get our feelings of music, our feelings of love, the symmetry and mathematical order of all things, including the universe. Something basically like knowing what's right from wrong. But for me, there is only one answer, and that is, there is a God who created us. I spent a lot of time looking over and trying to study and understand these things, and in the reading and struggling with these issues, I can only feel sorry for those who don't believe. I tell you, I'm convinced. For me, God makes sense of the universe and of human life. If God does not exist, then think about it. Maybe life is ultimately meaningless. If your life is doomed to end in death, then ultimately maybe it doesn't matter whether you lived or died. If God does not exist, we must ultimately live without hope. God also makes sense of the values we have. Think about it. If God does not exist, what are the consequences? But if he does exist and he truly loves us as children, then we have hope and meaning in our life, as well as hope for eternal life. Well, I've got into this background to kind of give you maybe where I started, because yes, I believe that there was a God before I believed that Jesus really was God's Son. So as time went on and I started attending church, and early in our marriage with Jan, we talked about it, and I kept wondering about this man called Jesus. And I decided I had to make up my mind, one way or the other. Was Jesus just a historical figure that became popular? Or was he really the Son of God? So I thought, well, in trying to decide, maybe I'll start with that dusty Old Testament. And I began to look for proof of Jesus in the writings. And as you know, the Old Testament is the accumulated writings of Jewish prophets from about over 4,000 years ago. These prophets recorded what was going on in their history, in their lifetime, but they also recorded their conversations with Yahweh, the Jewish name for God. And as I continued reading and studying these things, it was fascinating to me that these old predictions contained over 40 references, 40 predictions of the coming of someone called a Messiah. In the Old Testament, I also found several of these Jewish prophets accurately forecast not only the birth to a virgin mother, the purpose of his coming, where he would be born, where he would live and travel, that his side would be pierced, that he would suffer and die. And all this was related to God, I believe, and to these prophets over 700 years before his actual birth. And of course, the most telling prediction is that Jesus would die a martyr's death. He'd be crucified and buried. And exactly 3 days later, God would raise him from the dead. How did this happen as a prediction 700 years before the fact? So in my case, over a period of a year or so, and after all this Old Testament reading, I was becoming more and more convinced that Jesus probably was the Son of God. But I guess I still kind of wanted some more proof. Have you ever been there? I found additional proof in the written of testimony of many men who lived and walked and talked with Jesus during his lifetime. Interestingly enough, only over a period of 3 years that most of these men knew him. As you probably read, his friends and followers, apostles and other friends, were so awed and inspired by what they saw and what they witnessed that they had to talk about it to everyone they met. I think I'd be excited if I saw these things. Wouldn't you want to tell people about it? These writings by the people that recorded what they saw, I think there were at least 20 that I know of. They saw him heal crippled people, crippled men and women with a touch. Saw him restore life to several people. They also recorded at least 40 other events that most of us would say were supernatural. How could this happen? Such as calming a storm with a wave of his hand. What would you have done if you'd been there and seen that? What would you have done if you'd see this man, Jesus, raise someone from the dead? He'd been in the tomb for 4 days. I think you too would be excited and want to tell people about it. Do you need further proof? You need proof of the resurrection of Jesus from the tomb? Is that your hang-up? Is that your sticking point? Well, unless you think they're a lie, a lot of people wrote that they saw Jesus and talked to him after his death. Of course, he appeared to women at the tomb. We know about that. Later, he appeared to a group of fishermen. And he appeared to a group of more than 500 people at the same time. During this time, Jesus explained why he came to the earth. I think he was a messenger from God. He told us how we should live. We should not kill each other. We should tell the truth. We should not lie. You know the basics of Christian living. Many scholars have read and studied about these things we're talking about this morning. But there's a recent quote I ran across that I'd like to share with you. Quote, "It may be taken historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which he appeared to them as the Christ. These appearances were witnessed and by not only believers, but also unbelievers, skeptics, and even his enemies." Unquote. You need further proof. You might consider this. Other groups, religious groups, and the Romans tried to kill all the records, kill all the people that were talking about this Jesus, get rid of them, Wipe it out. It never happened. Well, think about it. John the Baptist was imprisoned and beheaded because he wouldn't stop talking about it, that Jesus was coming. Stephen was stoned to death. And his Jesus' own brother, James, was beheaded. Peter, disciple Peter, was crucified upside down for his thoughts and beliefs. How steadfast would you be if you were threatened to death and torture, if you didn't renounce and say, no, this never happened? I would lie all the time. But these men would rather suffer and die than say that it didn't happen. Luke Johnson, a New Testament scholar at Emory University, put it this way. I like this quote as well. Some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate this sort of conviction and worldwide movement that followed. This is why, as a historian, I cannot explain the rapid rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. So I guess you've figured out by now, for all of these reasons, I became a believer that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that he came to earth to show us the way we should go. So I became so moved by all of this that I one day in church, I finally got down on my knees and prayed, asked the Lord to forgive my sins, and asked Jesus to come into my life. So yes, I'm proud to say I am a Christian. I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. I believe he came as a messenger from God, a teacher and a role model for us. He did this to better explain God's plan and purpose for us and give us guidelines for our daily lives. And most importantly, to open the door to paradise for all of us that believe in his name. So, each of us must decide whether these 20th century old writings about Christ are real or were they fabricated. Is it truth or fiction that Jesus healed people by just touching them? Truth or fiction that he fed 5,000 people with a few loaves of bread? Truth or fantasy that he brought people back from the dead? Truth or fabrication that he gave sight to blind people? But most importantly of all, truth or a lie that he was raised from the dead and that he died for our sins? There's one more thing I'd like to talk about in a few minutes I have left, and that's this. Have you ever had someone challenge you and say, hey, if your God is so great, how come he allows death, wars, misery, and sufferings? Of course, this question has bothered me for a long time as well. But as I prayed and studied about this, some things became more evident. Yes, I know there's evil in the world, but God warned us about this at the very beginning. We read in Genesis, when he put Adam and Eve in the Bible, there was already a snake there. Satan was there in the form of a snake to tempt Eve. So again, you may ask, well, if God is in charge, why does he allow Satan to have such reign, to tempt us and to do evil things? Well, we probably will not know the final and absolute answer until the end, until we get to heaven, but in the meantime, I am led to believe that God has a purpose for us. God has a purpose for allowing evil in the world, and it is this. If there were no temptation in the world, there would be no true test of our feelings and beliefs. I feel that when God created us, he didn't choose to make us just a robot, automaton, that would bow down and say, yes, God, every time we were told to. No, he chose to give us free will. What does free will mean? It means you have the right to decide good from bad, the right to decide honesty from lie, and so on. So if there are no temptation in the world, there will be no true test of our emotions or feelings. So God wanted true followers, sincere followers, who really believed in him. And yes, I feel we are tempted, and I feel that we have decisions to make. At this point, I'm kind of reminded of a writing by Jesus' brother, James, one of the smaller books in our New Testament. And he wrote, I quote, "Consider pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives freely to all, and he'll give it to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because he that doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed about by the wind." So I feel that God has given each of us a reason for living. And we can trust that he can guide us if we listen to him. We'll have times of joy, times of sadness, times of war and times of peace. We'll have times of pleasure and times of pain. We'll feel love, and we'll lose those we love. This is a tough message, but our Christian faith gives us the strength and knowledge to persevere. Some time ago, I read in the Upper Room magazine. Comes out, has a daily devotional. But this kind of stuck with me. It's written by a lady in Ohio. "Knowing that this life is preparation for eternity gives me confidence and hope to have Jesus in my life." So I was fortunate to find Jesus early in my life. And as I grew older and started facing several problems and trials, I realized I was leaning more and more on God for strength and guidance. I found this especially to be true when I was flying combat in Vietnam. There are several events and things that happened to me there that I can only explain as miracles. My faith has especially been a rock for me since the passing of my dear wife, Jan, last December. I believe the Lord is pleased when we earnestly thank him and honor him. I feel that he invites us to go to him in prayer and tell him our worries and concerns. He knows if we have doubts, if we are tempted. We should take time to look around and find things to be thankful for, even in this time of COVID, fire, and smoke. We have so much to be thankful for, not only our life, our friends, our food, but certainly that we are protected and well cared for here in Paradise Valley Estates. Once again, I'm proud to tell you that I'm a Christian, and I know that Jesus will welcome me into his kingdom when I die. On a final and personal note, some of you know I am, at the urging of Bill Rawlinson, I recently became a member of the Gideons International. It's a worldwide organization that gives out over 80 million Bibles every year for those in need. Sometimes there are people who don't want one. Sometimes people don't know they need one. Anyway, if you'd like a Gideon Bible, please see me. I'll be happy to give you one. So I'd like to close with this from Colossians chapter 3. "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If you have any grievances against someone, forgive them as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. So let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you are called to be peaceful and be thankful. Amen. And now will you please join me in the singing of our next hymn, number 320, Beneath the Cross of Jesus.